Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. The Blessing series has been among the most beloved of the millennium amongst romance readers, and its legendary author, Beverly Jenkins, winner of the Romance Writers of America's Lifetime Achievement Award, joins us today to talk about her transformative catalog. Beverly, it's an honor to have you with us. Thank you for taking out time.
I am doing well. How are you?
Books have been with you your whole life, I understand. Just how young were you when you first began absorbing stories and books?
My mother read to me in the womb. Okay, and the first thing I remember, one of my first memories, is of her reading James Weldon Johnson's The Creation to me, and I couldn't have been more than, I don't know, 2 or 3 years old. So the the written word has always been there for me to tap into. I tell the story of her and my dad buying me those, little cloth books when I was a toddler, and of course too young to read them. But I used to eat the pages, and she would say, "Eat those words, baby. Eat those words, baby." So I think me being a writer is a product of her and my dad, and all those words I ate, as a toddler. But I started going to the library probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old. So this is like 1957, 58. Um, and the first thing that I really remember reading was the series The Borrowers. I don't know if you're familiar with those or not.
The series title.
Yeah, there were just little bitty people, and they lived, it's English set, I think, and they would borrow stuff from, it was like Land of the Giants, okay? Um, and they would borrow stuff from the people that they were living with to furnish their home, thimbles and, stuff like that. So that's sort of the first thing I remember. I went to the library every Saturday. My mother was just an avid reader. When she was growing up, because I grew up in Detroit. Detroit library was segregated when she was in high school. Even here in the North, I mean, they would, unlike some places in the South where African Americans weren't even allowed in the building. At least here, she could go in. They didn't have the African American authors shelved in with the rest of the collection. They had them behind the desk, and you had to ask for them. And she could not take them home. So she would just sit and read. So I get this reading thing, from her. And by the time I went, started going to the library at 57, 58, they were no longer segregated. And she didn't care what we read, as long as we were reading something.
That's a fun freedom to have as a kid. It sounds like quite a source of entertainment for you. Just how much reading were you doing? A book a day?
I had to have so much print a day. I mean, it was almost like an addiction. I mean, I'm reading cereal boxes and back then they didn't encourage uh, young kids to read the newspapers because your mind may be influenced by something sordid in the paper, right? And so she asked my elementary school teachers if it was okay for me to read the newspaper because I was reading papers every day. Free Press, Detroit News, Detroit Times, Michigan Chronicle. And they were like, yeah, it's okay because she wanted to do what was right by me. I'm the oldest of seven.
For all the reading you were doing, when did you cross the aisle onto the page in your own right? I have to imagine when you were editor of your elementary school newspaper, that was when it started?
Yeah, the fourth grade, I was like 9. It involved, Jesus, do I even remember? I remember Mrs. Notars was the teacher. And I think it was just getting like poems and little things from other kids in the school. Um, and I don't even remember how often it was published now. I do know that it was called the Jones Elementary School Comet. And I think I named it. I was one of them kids. Um, but yeah, that was my first sort of real, brush with the printed word outside of books and papers and newspapers and all of that.
Looking back, do you consider that an early indicator of what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Yeah, I didn't want to be a writer. I just wanted to work in a library. All I wanted were books, 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 books. But I still did these little stories, um, very bad stories, I'm sure, structure and all that wise. And then I told stories to my sisters at night when we were supposed to be sleeping. My mom would come in and say, "Go to bed, you got school in the morning." We were, when we weren't sleeping, we were listening to, you had those transistor radios with the one little earplug, and we could listen to the Red Wings at night, so, we listen to the Tigers and we listen to the Red Wings games. And I'm telling these, you know, quote unquote stories with romantic elements, as they would be called now. But no intentions of, and no desire to be a writer. I had a teacher in a high school, Linda Berkowitz, I remember her name. She had us do a short story assignment. This was like probably sophomore year in high school. And she was so amazed and so taken aback by the little short story that I wrote. And she wanted to enter it into a citywide contest. And, she needed my permission. I was like, nah, you're 14, 15 years old, east side of Detroit. You don't have a whole lot of confidence in anything. I'm at a high school with, 10,000 kids and, 7 floors. And yeah, I went to Cass Tech. We had elevators. You had to take a test in order to get in. And so, I was like, this little bitty slug kind of a person, just going through every day and no confidence in that. So I told her no, but I looked back and realized that was the first time I got affirmation that I could write.
That's such an important moment for any creative mind just starting to shine. By the time you started working on your first novel, Night Song, you were already working as a librarian, correct?
The market was basically closed for African American mass market, writers back then. Yeah, I probably started Night Song maybe 78, 76. But I was just writing it for me. I was working at the MSU library, Michigan State University Library, and coming home and reading, because, it's nothing better than a university library, especially if you work there, you can take home stuff. And my husband was a printer for the Michigan Education Association, which is the big teacher union back then. So he would come home, and this is BC, this is before children. So he would come home, get cleaned up, go play tennis, because he was on the tennis team in high school. And I would come home and read or work on this little story that, this little romance that, was just for me, because, I had no intentions, like I said, of being a writer or any way to get it published during that time frame. But I had always loved a good love story. I mean, even though there was nothing in the mass market media, TV, movies, that reflected anybody who looked like me. But love the Doris Day movies, love the, movies if they had a romantic element, with James Garner, I mean, all of that. And I just started putting it on the page with a story with somebody who looked like me. So you had a Buffalo soldier and a school teacher.
You really were a pioneer in the dawn of African American romance novels. Who were any real life muses you channeled crafting what would become your first book?
I often said my mom was Black before it was fashionable. Okay. Uh, Very, very proud of who she was as a woman of color. She used to collect, she just had this scrapbook. I remember when I was little, with all these, Black faces and, Black people. And then her grandfather, which would have been my great grandfather, um, born in Kentucky in, late 19th century, late 18th century, whatever. But anyway, um, he was a Muslim. He had changed his name, um, did his Hajj in Medina, did his Hajj, and my brain is dead here this morning. But lived in Nepal, lived in Pakistan, um, and I remember I was seeing him. I couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old. He'd come to visit my grandmother, which was his daughter, and had this big, beard, and it was a big guy. And I remember being terrified of him, because of the beard and all that, and I'm little and all of that. But he was a big influence on my mother. He was what they called a race man. That's my landline. I'm not answering. They just want me to sell in me medical braces, or, I'm a woman of a certain age, so I just stopped answering my phone. But he was a big influence on her, Garveyite, all of that. And I remember in the 70s, she'd found his letters from when he lived overseas. And she gave them to me. And I'm looking for content, this is, every letter says, send me my check. Because he had worked for the railroad when he was living full time in the States. So I got these great letters with these awesome stamps on them. But nothing inside but send me my pension check. So all of that, from her side of the family, formed me.
I have to imagine working at a library, you had a deep well of source material to draw from in creating the historical side of your storytelling.
When I was working at Michigan State University, it was the head of the head clerk for the kids. I had like 65 kids working for me when I was, at the school. But they had a complete set of the Journal of Negro History. And I would take those out. There's I don't know if you know anything about Michigan State other than, Magic Johnson and all of that, right? There's a river that runs through campus, and it's called the Red Cedar River. And I would take armfuls of those journals out on my lunch hour, eat my lunch, to the journals, just, because I was interested in the history because of my mom. And little did I know that those articles would come in handy 20 years later as sources and citations for what I would eventually write. I mean, life is so strange sometimes, You the guy's got a great sense of humor.
You started writing Night Song in 1978, but it wasn't until 1994 that it eventually found a publisher and you found your way onto shelves in your own right. Please fill us in on the journey from one point to the other.
I was working on it, and probably in 92, probably late 92. I was working at Park Davis Pharmaceutical Library. Park Davis started in Detroit. It's probably one of the first, big pharma companies in the United States. They've been in, for a while. Anyway, the original makers of Listerine. Okay. So I was working in a library. I was working at the reference desk, and one of my colleagues had just had a sweet romance published. Sweet romance means, no love scenes, fade to black, Barbara Cartland kind of stuff, right? And I was telling her about this book that I was working on, and we were celebrating her, and we took her to lunch and all this. So she wanted to see it. So I brought in my little raggedy manuscript, right? And she looked at it and she said, you need to get this published. And I'm like, right, where, So I tell people that she harassed me every day. I swear she did. She's a white colleague. Um, harassed me every day. Find the agent, get it together, Like I said, I had my dream job. I was in the library. I didn't care nothing about getting this book published. So to shut her up, I have no idea how I found Vivian Stevens. I think I had seen her name in a Romantic Times or something. I don't know. But anyway, I got in touch with her, sent her my little raggedy manuscript, just to shut Laverne up, my friend at work. And she called the desk probably 5 days later, less than a week later, and wanted to offer to represent me. Vivian had been a huge editor at Dell. She's probably I like to say she's probably the person that really started the American tradition of romance. She's also the founder of Romance Writers of America. But she had gotten out of publishing. She also published the first two African-American romance writers. Rosalind Wells, who was she was the first Black reporter for Look magazine, and Sandra Kitt, who was the first Black romance writer for Harlequin. So she took me on. She had gotten out of publishing. She had a small literary agency. She started shopping this book. And I probably got enough rejections to pay for my house, your mama's house, everybody's house, right? But it didn't matter to me because I wasn't trying to get published. I'm sure if somebody who had their heart set on being published would have probably been very, very disappointed and, depressed and all of that. But I was in the library. If this book never sells, I'm still coming to work in the library tomorrow. I'm fine. So then on June 3rd, 1993, which was my late husband's birthday, I got what we call the call. And Ellen Edwards, who's the executive editor at Avon Books, called and said she wanted to, buy the book. So, and then came and before that, most of the rejection letters said, great writing, but great writing, but great writing, but. The but had to do with New York didn't know what to do with it. Because in the minds of New York and probably the country at that time, and in a lot of ways still, a 19th century story featuring African Americans or featuring Black people should have been slavery based. And so here I am with a story with a Buffalo soldier, an Oberlin educated school teacher, because Oberlin was probably one of the only places that let African Americans have a higher education. And they're free Black people, and they're living in a small town on the plains of Kansas. And New York was like, we don't have a box for this. What are we supposed to, so being in the right spot with the right talent at the right time. Ellen saw the potential in my little raggedy manuscript. Because later she would say, Beverly, I need a story. I had 700 pages of nothing but heat. She was like, we need a story. I'm like, really? Yeah, we need a story. So now 27 years later and 42 books later, I'm here talking to you.
That shows just how far out on the cutting edge you were with this new subgenre of romance you were helping to pioneer. It must have felt amazing when you were finally holding that first published book in your hands with that dream realized.
It was amazing. I mean, the first, my mom, of course, and, all of my family was very proud. And, people that I worked with were very proud. I was proud, especially since this wasn't what I planned to do. Sometimes you think you've reached your dream and life says, here, put this hat on, try this. And then for the first signing, we were at a I think it was a Walden Books in Ann Arbor. And I had touched base with some of the Buffalo Soldiers reenactors. A lot of them are with our state police. And they showed up with, uniforms and saddles and guns. I still don't remember whether we had horses or not. I'm not sure. But and the guy who was on the cover, gorgeous man he was a fireman out of LA. And them women didn't care nothing about me. I mean, they were walking over me to get to him. It's like, who are you? So very, very proud. And then I got so the book came out in July, and I got a 5-page spread in People that following February. So it was kind of amazing. Kind of amazing.
Well, you were definitely what they call an overnight success. When you had the chance to sit down with your first series in the Grayson family, what was the roots of the idea for that family and the book Vivid that launched it?
Black people started coming to the state of Michigan. Michigan became a state in 1837. Black people started coming to Michigan before then and starting these little communities, usually fueled by the support of Quakers. So a lot of those, well, not a lot, but some of those communities still exist. And when I went to Michigan State, I met some of these people from that side of the state. Because, when you grow up in Detroit, you figure every Black person in the state is in Detroit. No. Black people in Saginaw, Black people up north, that whole thing. So I like to put my stories where African Americans actually walked. So I had this, and I wanted with Vivid, which was the second book, I wanted to do a tribute to the 19th century African American female doctors that we know very, very little about. So I created Grayson Grove in one of these pioneering communities, and they needed a doctor. And I like for my characters to wear the history so I don't have to do the info dumps. So she comes in and, she's got all this history that she's wearing, the classes that she took, the courses that she, the books that she used. So you use all of that as like, gilding on the painting to ground it and to give it the little details that, make the story resonate a little bit more. So Grayson Groves, I did 2 there. I did Vivid and Jewel, yeah, which is a follow-up. Many, many years apart. So that was the second small town that I created, because the first one was Henry Adams for Night Song. And Henry Adams is also the location for my Blessing series.
Introducing viewers to another popular family within your catalog, the LeVeqs. If you would, tell us about the book that kicked off that series, Through the Storm. Was the original idea for this to be a standalone or a series?
Yeah, I wanted to highlight just slavery in a different way. We don't sometimes get the background. And then I run across a small history piece that's, not a lot, but in the slavery net were a couple of royals. And the slave owners, once they figured that out, because they wouldn't work, everybody did their work for them. And a couple of slave owners said, okay, well, we'll just leave her alone and let, people will work better if we, not harassing the queen, right? So I wanted to take that and put that in a situation where I could use it. And that fueled some of Through the Storm. And then also I wanted to do the Jean de Couleur of Louisiana, because a lot of people don't know about the wealthy, that class of people in New Orleans. and the problems that they had, because they wanted to separate themselves from the rest of the Black community and, tried to petition the president. And he was like, no, you Black just like everybody else. So no, you don't get to vote. You don't get to, yeah, you got property. And, and the Native Guard saved Andrew Jackson's butt at 1812 in New Orleans. So they had a history that hadn't been highlighted. So I wanted to, it's like cooking. You get a pot, and you put all these elements in it, and add a little bit of this, add a little bit of that. Stir it around, spice it up a little bit, and let it cook like jambalaya or gumbo. And next thing you know, you got a story. So yeah, so they the readers love them, love the LeVeqs. I was able to do Harriet Tubman Spy Group with them, the Death Books, lots of stuff going on in my books. Lots of stuff going on.
Well, that's what readers love so much about them, the richness of character, of history, and the wonderful love stories that are told, especially in books like The Taming of Jessie Rose, which won your first historical romance award. Take us back to the moment she first walked out of your mind and onto the page.
I just, we just did a reread of that on my Facebook page this week. We're going through all the books again. I love that book. I'm a big Western fan. I told people in interviews before that I had probably seen every John Wayne movie ever made because my grandfather was a big John Wayne fan. He's a big Westerns fan. And they didn't live too far from us, my grandparents. And so we'd go and spend the weekend with them. And in Detroit, we had Channel 50. And on Friday nights, they had Morris. He would show the spooky movies, the 50-Foot Woman, It Came from Outer Space. I mean, all those old, grade B classic, movies. But, when you sit with my grandfather at night, he's not watching that. If you want to stay up late, you watch John Wayne with him, so he didn't care nothing about that. So I've probably seen every John Wayne movie ever made. So, and he lived in Texas for a while. So I love he called them shoot 'em ups. So I loved a good shoot 'em up. I knew I wanted to write, I don't know where these characters come from. I mean, they just sort of tap me on the shoulder and show up. But I'd always wanted to write a Western after I decided I was going to be a writer. And a female rancher. One of the things, Dorothy Sterling's book, We Are Your Sisters, Black Women of the 19th Century, was sort of my Bible with a little B when I started. And she said the reason that Black women were very successful after the Civil War, I mean, we were some of the first doctors. Mary Ann Shadd had the first newspaper by a woman on the North American continent, all of this stuff. So she said the reason these women were successful is because of the three gifts that they had. One was that they worked. All of my heroines worked. Nobody's sitting at home drinking Kool-Aid or eating, bonbons. Everybody working, whether they're slave or free, because they had to. The second gift was the commitment to community and social activism. The third gift was pushing the envelope on gender and race. So all of my heroines have at least one. And Jessie pushes that envelope on gender and race by being a female rancher. So I love the story of that. And then Griffin was just a side character that nobody met. He was just talked about in Topaz, being a ladies' man, stealing from the railroads. And we learned why at the beginning of Jessie Rose. He's seeking revenge for the death of his mom. And brought these two characters together, and it's a damn good book. A damn good book. I wish they'd make a movie. I could see Taraji Henson as Jesse.
Consider it another example of your innovation at work. At the same time, your books have always scratched that basic itch romance readers have for the love story, and you've created them with so many couples over the years. What's been the key for tying it together book after book in a series?
What's worked for me is writing a good story. I mean, and regardless of the genre, you have to know your characters. Um, one of I've been blessed with having great editors, and the editor that I've been with the longest, Erica, she and I've been together, God, I don't know, long time. Um, and one of the things that she always says to me is to dig deeper, and that not only with the story but with the characters. So I think the more you know about your characters, and then you have to know the tropes in romance in order to break the tropes. Um, you got to read romance, number one. We have a lot of people who want to, slide through the gate with their own idea of what they think romance is as opposed to what romance is. And they don't do well. They don't do well. Well, how come it has to have an HEA? Because that's what the readers expect. I mean, you don't go into sci-fi and write a good book, and wonder why nobody's reading it. The elements, and romance has changed a lot. I mean, they were very, very rapey back when they started in the 80s. And now you have these consent is the big thing. Has been for 15 years. So romance is very feminist these days also. So all of these elements, and if you don't read romance, then you don't know anything about that. You figure, okay, I'm gonna come in with a romance that I think is, from 1970, and then wondering why, people are, wanting to chop your head off. But I think the rules of writing that make any book successful apply to romance as well. And I think it's the hardest genre to write because you're writing relationships and you're writing feelings and emotions, and that shit is hard. If people say, "Oh, it's easy," and I had to tell one person, I said, "Okay, this is what I want you to do. I want you to chronicle your relationship from the first time you set eyes on her, and then I want you to tell me the highs and the lows and how you felt and what your lovemaking was like, and then put it on paper, 400 pages, and try and sell it." And the guy was like, never mind. So, we get a lot of derision. Um, I think mostly because it's female centered, not as female centered as it used to be. Now everybody's getting HEA. We got queer, we got trans, we got, non-binary. Everybody's getting a romance, and that's a wonderful thing.
You successfully wove these romances against these really delicate fabric of the post-emancipation historical backdrops across every corner of the country. Reflecting back, what kind of new aspects do you think you were bringing to the reading experience that made your style of writing so resonant?
I think that issue is what we're taught Black history is, and what we've seen on the screen as for what Black history is. There's no joy. It's all pain, all of it. And there's been more to us than pain. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. Even as we dealt with the Jim Crow and the lynchings and the Red Summer in 1919, we still built communities. We still loved. We still had birthday parties. We still built colleges. We didn't, the ancestors were so not only strong, but clever and loving, because you had to come home and love somebody after dealing with that mess all day. You know, somebody did to salve your spirit. And those are the elements that I think are missing. And they're elements of a racist humanity. So we have all these people in the country who don't think we have any humanity because what they have been fed or told about who we are as a race. Prime example, my husband, after he left the printing job and became a labor negotiator for the same teachers union that he started out as a printer. And his secretary, when we were in our 30s back then, she was a little bit older, she's probably in her 50s, and she'd been raised in Florida. And so I would bring the baby in, have lunch with dad, and because he loved his daughter. And she stopped me one day and she said, I never knew Black people love their children. She said, I was raised, talking about herself, she was raised that we dealt with our kids like, she said, dogs and puppies. And she's talking to me and she's got tears in her eyes. And she said, I'm so sorry. And she never was overtly bigoted to me or any of that. She's a great secretary for my husband. But inside. So those are the kinds of elements that people have grown up with that give us that national lack of humanity, because you don't see it until you see it for some people. Or until you read it. Yeah.
One of your most celebrated and long-running series began with Bring on the Blessings and enchanted readers with a second helping, and 10 bestsellers have followed to date over the 20 years since. Take us back to when Bernadine Brown first came a knocking.
She just showed up one day, this woman with all this money, but I didn't, 10 or 15 years before the Blessing series started. So I didn't know who she was, what her story was going to be. So I just threw her in a drawer. And people asked me, was it Oprah? I'm like, no, it's not Oprah. It's Bernadine Brown. And then I ran across an article in Parade magazine about an academic in Iowa who'd convinced the United States government to let her have an abandoned Air Force base. And she brought in at-risk kids and foster parents, and most of them were senior citizens, and it was called a place called Hope. So, as an author, you see stuff like that. You're like, okay, I don't know where I'm going to use this, but I threw that in the drawer too. So my agent sold the series without letting me know. She had been on me to write a small town series. And I was like, no, I'm not writing a small town series. I said, I'm content to continue writing these award-winning African-American historical romances, right? And, touring and all that. So after my husband passed in 2003, I was up with his mom. I got a phone call from my agent. And she said, well, I sold the series. And I'm like, what series are you talking about? She said, a small town series that, I've been trying to get you to write. Well, I sold it. And here's what, they want as a lead, and here's the money. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm writing a small town series. So then, I had to go back and figure out what this small town series, excuse me, was going to be about. The Blessing series.
How early did the idea come to you to have her buy the town of Henry Adams, which really then itself became a character in the series that followed?
It's also a character in the first book. The The characters in my contemporaries, so that means the Blessing series and my romantic suspense, are descendants of my historical characters. Okay. So the Blake sisters, the brothers in the Detroit series are descendants of Hester and Galen from Indigo. So, okay. All of my books are connected except one book, and that's the Beverly Jenkins trivia question. And I never give the answer because I want you to read the books. Shameless plug, right? So I had read about every now and then people putting towns up for sale on eBay. And so I wasn't sure what the town was going to be for the Blessing series. I looked at Grayson Grove. I looked at Henry Adams. And the more I thought about it, the more Julys came to the table, which are my Black Seminole outlaws. And they lived in Henry Adams in a couple of the books. So decided to do Henry Adams. And I live in a small town. And so I think about, 1999 was a Great Recession, and small towns were really taking a hit. No infrastructure, no infrastructure, not a lot of young people staying around. And I based that on, Henry Adams is based on Nicodemus, Kansas, which was a true place. And I looked at their history. And after World War II, people started leaving. And then by the 70s, there was nobody there. So I wanted to put all of that together. So now my little fictional town in 1999 has no young people, has no infrastructure. They can't pay the bills. So in order to hoping to preserve the history there, they put themselves on eBay, hoping somebody will come in and, take care of the tax bills and all of that. And Bernadine sees this after she gets her divorce money. He's an oil king. They got more money than God, even now. You look at it, we made $300 million last year. What are you going to do with all that damn money? So, yeah, she caught her husband playing the two-back beast on his desk on her birthday. He's supposed to be meeting her for lunch. So she takes that money and, to quote Luke, when much is given, much is expected. And I tell people I would have bought Dooney Burke purses and shoes, but, giving a lot of it away. But, she buys a town and tries to restore it. And we're now 10 and a half books in.
How vividly do you see the town and all of its life going on as you're putting it down on the page?
For me, all of my stories play like a movie in my head. People tell me I write very, very visual. And I write visual because I see it. One of the other writers for my publisher, I don't know if her editor had her read Blessings, I don't know. But she came to me at one of our tour stops, and she said, I'm reading the Blessing series. She said, all these people are different. And I'm like, yeah. And she said, well, how do you do that? And I'm like, I don't know. My stories are not of me. My stories come through me. And it's just a matter of, am I smart enough and intuitive enough to get it? They know the story and I don't. I'm a pantser. So I write by the seat of my pants. I don't outline. I just try and keep up,
So it really sounds like, as with a lot of authors we talk to on the show, you really let the characters lead where the story's going to follow.
Yeah, because I don't know what's going to happen. A lot of times I don't know. We were talking about Al Roker has expressed an interest in bringing the Blessing series to TV. So they've started a Facebook page. So all of my readers it's called the Hope Town Facebook page. So we had a book club meeting last night, me and all these women, and we did book 4. We're doing each book. There's a lot of people are new to the series. My folks have read it, bought in books, at least 3 times. I enjoy not knowing sometimes. In book 1, one of the kids, and I don't know why I wrote this, he didn't have a birth certificate because the book's about found families and adoptive kids and all of that. And he didn't have a birth certificate, and I just wrote that down. I didn't know why I wrote it down until book 3, when we found out why he didn't. So being a pantser is fascinating to me in a lot of ways. One of the books, one of the main characters does something really dumb. I mean, just stupid. And he leaves town. I don't know where he went. The book is due at 9:00 in the morning. I'm standing in the bathroom at 4 a.m. in the middle of the night, screaming into the mirror, "Where are you?" It comes to me right then. And I'm like, y'all couldn't have told me this 2 weeks ago? I told Sarah at Smart Bitches, doing an interview with her, that I imagine my characters are sitting in the corner of my office laughing at me because they know the story and I don't. And they feed me these little pieces, whenever they feel like it. But it's a joy because I'm learning, the first 5 books are dedicated to each of the kids. And then we start in on the adults. And each book we get to do more and more. It's like peeling a onion. And we learn more and we learn more and more, not only about the kids, but also the adults.
I'm sure you hear a lot of variations on this from fans of the Blessing series, but what are a few of your personal favorites?
Book 3 is a favorite because it had, just hilarious moments when the Oklahoma Julys show up for a wedding, and then these heartbreaking moments when we find out why Devin doesn't have a birth certificate. He's raised by his grandma, and she died, and he didn't get a chance to say goodbye. So when he goes to the cemetery, oh man, everybody wept. In fact, I got everybody reading these books. Publishing for a long time thought only Black people read Black books and, only white people read white books. Wrong, of course. I have a gentleman down in Arkansas who's on the radio, who wears a big old white hat. And he follows me on Twitter. And after one of the books, not necessarily book 3, but he hollered at me on Twitter and he said, "Miss Bev, you shouldn't be making old guys cry." So the story resonates with everybody. Teens are reading it. There's no heat in them. Teens are reading them. Church book clubs are reading them. I got an email from a retired Marine drill sergeant who said, "I know your publisher doesn't think I'm demographics." He's a white guy. Your demographics. He said, "But I love these damn books." So when you write something that resonates that way with so many different people of, race, creed, color, age, it's a joy to, and sometimes it's tiring to be like, okay, I'm tired of y'all folks now. But it's also a joy to go back and see what new nuggets you can mine out of a series or location or a character.
Another great piece of advice. Turning to your most recent success, The Old West. This actually began as a spin-off of another series, correct?
The Old West series grew out of Through the Storm. Ryan Fontaine is the brother of Sable Fontaine. And he's passing for white. And I didn't know where he was for 15 years. And the readers were like, well, where is Ryan? We want Ryan's story. What happened to him? What is he doing? And I'm like, I don't know. He hadn't talked to me in 15 years. I don't know. So I see this article about an archaeological dig in Nevada. Silver City, Nevada. And they find out that it was owned by an African-American. Best saloon restaurant in the city at that time. And I'm like, this is where Ryan is. We're going to, so I dedicated the book to the Ryan whiners. I called them the Ryan whiners because they're always whining about Ryan. But I love that series. And it has arced over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 books. Sony has optioned it. But optioning and making are two different things.
Has continuing to deliver new Destiny installments to your fans been as much fun to write?
Destiny series was interesting because I got to do the Black Spanish history of California. And got to tell people about Queen Califia, who California is named after. And people's like, I'm like, she's not real. She's not real, people. But she was in a 14th century Spanish novel. She was an African Amazon. And, she was, Wonder Woman of her age. And she lived on an island of gold. And a lot of people think that the Spaniards came west looking for, of course, they were looking for gold, spurred by Queen Califia. Disney had a exhibit dedicated to her, and they used Whoopi as the model for her. And then they, replaced it with the Little Mermaid ride. So, there goes your history, replaced by the Little Mermaid. So I love that for the being able to tell a history that, we not familiar with. So
when you're writing in the racier end of the pool with contemporary romances like Black Lace or Sexy Dangerous or Deadly Sexy, The Edge of Midnight, is that like switching into a different headspace completely? And what are some of the underlying fundamentals? Are they the same for you?
It's good to have a editor and a publishing company that trusts your writing and doesn't want to see you pigeonholed just writing historicals or just writing, because some publishers do that. One of the things I love about doing the contemporaries is, I can have car chases, I could blow stuff up, I got black op helicopters, I'm a big sports fan. So, one of my JT from Sexy Dangerous is a sports agent. And I can do techie stuff and, invent stuff that hasn't been invented yet because this is my world and, I'm creating it. So it cleans the palate, because, I'm like a little kid sometimes, I want to do something new. I'm playing this sandbox today or that sandbox today.
Absolutely. Keeping it fun is key. For your fans along those same lines, what can they expect next you've been working on? They're going to be hitting shelves soon.
Just the idea that I know, don't know what's going to happen. I'm just trying to keep up. We had to pull the 11th Blessings book because I had just too much on my plate. And for the first time in 27 years, couldn't meet a deadline. Because I was zooming all over the damn country. I went from Oregon to San Diego to Appalachia to Orlando, Florida, and every place in between. And this was before the book came out in February. Miss Bev is wanted everywhere, So we moved it. It's a Christmas book. So instead of it coming out this year, it'll come out next year. So in the meantime, I have a historical due to Erica in September that I have not started. It's the third book in the Women Who Dare series because I don't know who it's going to be. I'll figure it out. I got to start figuring it out pretty soon. It'll give me about 6 months to write it. So I always write Women Who Dare. So we just decided to give it a name. Romance readers and also, sci-fi fantasy readers are really, really into series right now. So to sort of feed into that, I've been doing these series. I prefer standalones because sometimes if the characters are connected, I may not know enough about the backstory in order to give the story the depth and width and span and all of that that I want, which is why with the Women Who Dare series, nobody's connected. They're different characters, so not family or anything like that.
When you hit the road next, what do you most enjoy when you're out on tour and you're seeing new fans as well as familiar faces that have been in your book signing lines for years?
Connecting with the readers. Connecting with the readers, and they're like, Miss Beverly, you talk to my mom on the phone. We talk to my sister on the phone. They bring their children, they bring their grandkids. I think I'm connected to probably every Black woman in this country now. It's like 6 degrees of separation. If I need something, I just throw up a hand and somebody says, well, I know so-and-so who knows so-and-so who knows so-and-so who can get that for you. But because of them, without them, I wouldn't be here. They are my gold. They are my Bitcoin. They are, everything that stirs the drink starts with them, which is why I have 3 Facebook pages, which is why every morning before I even have my coffee, I'm saying good morning. I tell them good night every night. I tell them when I count my blessings, I count them twice. So.
Over the years, when you've been at signings and encountered that younger version of yourself holding one of your books, what do you tell them when they say their dream is to become you?
Finish the book. Stop talking about it. Finish the book, regardless of what they're writing. I don't care what you're writing. Finish the book. Quit talking. And learn as much as you can about the business of writing. People say, well, I've written this book, now what? I send everybody, I give them homework. I send everybody to janefriedman.com. She's got a fabulous website. She's sort of making it her business these days now that, she's no longer doing the imprints and all of that, to helping people with their, publishing questions. And my number one thing, don't give up. Keep going. Don't give up. Don't you dare give up. There is someone out here who wants to read that story. And they won't get that story if you give up. So.
In closing, what would you like to be remembered for among all you've done to pioneer new frontiers of romance novel writing throughout your remarkable career?
Somebody asked me what I wanted on this is sort of like that, my headstone. Sort of the same kind of thing. And I told him, I said, I wanted to say she tried. She tried to be a good person. She tried to make the path wider for writers coming up behind her, who, especially the ones who look like her. She tried to be a better person today than she was yesterday. She tried.
Beverly Jenkins, it's been a privilege. Thank you so much for being on About the Authors TV.
Thank you so much for having me. You have a great day, okay?